Hello, everybody. Thank you for those in person. Thank you all for coming out to the library tonight on this cold winter night. And for those joining at home, welcome. I just want to go over a couple things of how tonight's program will work. This is a hybrid program. So again, we have the in-person and then we have the online audience. So at the end, if you have any questions, if you're in the room, if you want to raise your hand, I'll try to bring the mic over to you. That way people at home can hear what was asked. And then for those online, if you just want to type any questions you have into the chat, we will get those asked at the end. So before we get started, I want to highlight one program we have coming up. Next Thursday, January 25th at 6:30, we have the Next Chapter program, Planning for the Future of Central Ohio, which is presented in partnership with the United Way of Central Ohio. Michael Wilkos, who is the Senior Vice President of Community Impact at United Way of Central Ohio, will examine trends in population growth, demographics, housing, and other aspects that will affect the quality of life around Central Ohio and Bexley. So we hope you'll join us for that. Again, next Thursday, January 25th at 6:30. You can attend in here at the library or online at bexleylibrary.org/TV or on our YouTube channel. Tonight, we are very excited to have Conrade C. Hinds, who worked as an architect and has lived in Central Ohio for 46 years. He's a board member of the Columbus Landmarks Foundation and retired from the city of Columbus, where he worked as a project manager at the Columbus-Dublin Road water plant. He is the author of the books Made in Ohio, A History of Buckeye Invention and Ingenuity, what we will be discussing tonight, as well as the books The Lost Circuses of Ohio, Columbus and the Great Flood of 1913, the disaster that reshaped the Ohio Valley, and The Great Columbus Experiment of 1908, Waterworks that changed the world. As an author, he enjoys researching and writing about forgotten history. So thank you again for all of you for coming out and for joining online, and I will turn it over to our speaker, Conrade. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Okay, I appreciate everyone coming out here this evening. I want to start by saying, since I was a kid, I have this extraordinary passion for Ohio. I started reading about Ohio, let's say in fifth grade, when a teacher gave me a real appreciation for Ohio. And what I discovered is that Ohio started out as a very, let's see, the coveted, let's see, is this advancing? There we go. It was very coveted. The Ohio land, some call it the Ohio country. Okay, it was coveted by the French and by the British. But the French had it first, and the French had an entire economy with the Native Americans that the British wanted a part of, all right? And that's where the so-called French and Indian War came about. Now, really, it was a war of the French versus the British. But since the British won, they could call it the French and Indian War. Pointing out just who really didn't know how to act. And the interesting thing about the French and Indian War, very quickly I want to point out, is this is what caused two things: the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Because afterwards, based on the expenditures, the colonists were being taxed to death. Taxation without representation. And they got fed up with it. And in France, they were being taxed. And they got fed up with it. So what do you end up with? Two revolutions. Okay. Now, on to Ohio. The first thing after the Revolutionary War, once Ohio became a state, it was carved out of the Northwest Territory, the first state. One of the things, they got rid of slavery. They, were rather innovative. They came up with the land grant schools. This took place down in Marietta. And one of the first things they had to address was establishing an economy. How do you establish an economy? You need transportation. And this was the beauty of Ohio. Ohio was that heart nestled in between a waterway at the north, Lake Erie, a waterway in the south, the Ohio River. And not too long after the founding of America, all of a sudden the federal government, one of their first big federally funded projects, they started building the National Road, which went north and south through the state. All of a sudden, what is this? This allows goods, services, but particularly goods and resources to be transported. Transported places such as Cleveland, Cincinnati, even across the state line. Let's talk about Pittsburgh, okay? You had Dayton, the Akron-Canton area. This whole idea of manufacturing, suddenly, manufacturing and transportation. And now you have a central area that, first of all, they're sending goods to the East Coast. They're sending goods south because they have access to the Mississippi River, okay? And then came the railroad. Now the railroad, boy, that allowed them to go pretty much any and everywhere. The big deal was, let's take a rail line to just about every county seat, okay? And with this, again, goods, especially the agricultural goods, but also manufactured goods, could now go anywhere. And again, Ohio's nestled right there in the heart of America, and so it's going everywhere, building the nation, okay? One of the things in terms of inventions, and the book is about not just manufacturing, but also inventions. One of the first inventions I want to point out, in terms of trains and railroads, the biggest problem with a train early on was, how do you get it to stop? Well, they could get it to go, but how do you get it to stop? This guy right here, Granville Woods. Granville Woods came up with this invention. It's called a multiplex telegraph. This allows one train to know where the other train is. This greatly reduced collisions. Please note something. 150 years ago, what are we talking, 1870s? There were as many people being killed in railroad accidents as there were, percentage-wise, being killed today in traffic, car accidents. Okay. And most of those were collisions. Okay. So here's an individual. By the way, Thomas Edison also came up with his version of the multiplex telegraph. They came together in federal court. Granville Woods won, not once, but twice. He beat Thomas Edison. Okay. Here's another. This gentleman is just fun all around in terms of, his thing was to make things better. Okay. Now you use his invention every time you get in the car. And when you go home, you're going to get in your car and you're going to turn the key. This is the guy that allowed you to get in the car and turn the key. Okay. That's an Ohio invention. This was Deed's Barn over on the north side of Dayton. And this is where a lot of this took place. These inventions took place. Now, Kettering coming up with this, Henry Ford. Okay, hear a lot about Henry Ford. Did you know Henry Ford's wife drove an EV, an electric vehicle? all of the rich men bought EVs, electric vehicles, for their wives. Why? Because to crank a car, that was very dangerous. It was very common. I'm going to say that, very, very common, okay, for a broken elbow, a broken arm, this business, especially if it, suddenly goes back, all right? So when he came up with this, all of a sudden, say everyone here, adults, we've heard of Delco, Dayton Electric, Dayton, E for Electric, L Laboratories Company. Dayton Electric Laboratories Company. That's what Delco stood for. Okay? National Cash Register. There's an item that Ohio was definitely known for well into, my goodness, the 1970s. It was National Cash Register. Now we can say, oh, IBM. Well, a former vice president of, named Watson, National Cash Register started IBM. Okay, just to be sure. But look at this complex. Okay. Kettering, he's the one who suddenly, in the old days you would crank a cash register. He also put a motor on the cash register. Okay. And these were being sold internationally. And look at this complex. We're talking 1900. Okay, this was the Microsoft of 1900. Okay, here's somebody forgotten. Few people ever hear about him. John Butler Titus. He came up with a way of producing sheet metal, the coiled sheet metal. And with that, because he worked for Armco Steel. Of course, that process was then applied to aluminum and any number of other metals. But he revolutionized the whole idea of producing sheet metal products. And of course, with sheet metal, you can do what? Stamping, any number of things. 22 years old. 22 years old, Charles Hall came up with a cost-effective way. Aluminum used to be in a very exotic line, platinum metal, all right? This is the guy that came up with a way to produce it very cost-effectively, greatly reduce the cost. And there you can see the coils. That's back to Titus. That was his invention there. But age 22. Now, his company was not actually here in Ohio. He went to Oberlin College, and he was from Ohio, but Alcoa Aluminum. Any of you have heard of it? That's the company that he started. Chillicothe. I remember as a kid, you drive through Chillicothe and you get that Chillicothe aroma. Okay, those of you old enough to remember that. Okay, Mead started Mead Paper in Dayton, and then they later moved their mill to Chillicothe, where it still is today. I think now a Korean company owns that, if I'm correct. But up until 20 years ago, they were the mover and shaker regarding paper products, even school supplies. Just about every year, we were buying Mead products. Libby. Something people have forgotten. Libby was from Massachusetts. The city of Toledo, okay, back in the 1880s, recruited Libby to come and open up a glass factory to take advantage of the natural gas boom that they had. Indiana, Ohio, there was a natural gas boom. And they were from Ohio, as a matter of fact, originally. Ball fruit jars over in Muncie, Indiana. Muncie, Indiana recruited them, okay, because of the natural gas boom. An awful lot of these companies, came here to the Midwest because of that natural gas boom, okay? Now, he had Michael Owens over there. Look at this thing. I mean, this is, you know what this is? This is, it's a glass blowing machine, but that's the equivalent to, what's his name, Wozniak coming up with the laptop computer. Okay. You're talking about a first-rate mind. These are not college-educated MIT people either. Okay. All right, these are, McGuffey's reader. That was their education. Okay. Okay, I want to go back just to show you as to how things were advanced 150 years ago. Remember I mentioned NCR? Take a look at this. Oh, this is something, look at how much light is in here, okay? See the light? For the most part, in the day, that was regarded as a very comfortable place to work. Even for the guys over here, take a look here. See here, there's where they're starting to, here's a cash register right here. Now this one has a crank on it. You see the crank right there? All right. Okay. And they had, certain, there was a dress code and the like, but you could do just about any and everything. They had their own private gardens, a cafeteria. They even had financing for housing. It was sort of a utopia. Now here's a guy, this used to be a big name when I first moved to Columbus, Timken, okay? Right over on Fifth Avenue, the roller bearing. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing moves in the world without, okay, a bearing. Nothing moves, all right? Even in World War II, it was, if you bombed a bearing plant, boy, you put the whole mechanized army out of business, okay? But, and they started out, his father came up with a special bearing which allowed wagons to just turn easier and not flip over. And they started, I think it was down in Missouri, and they moved to Canton. Why? To be close to the automotive industry. Yes, Detroit in the 20th century was known for assembly. Ohio and Indiana, but primarily Ohio was known for the manufacturing of parts and components. Still is, okay? Of course, Akron, when it comes to tires, few people, I put this one in here, a lot of people don't realize, they might think there's a machine that automatically, you put rubber in and it blows up a tire. No, there's a guy that's actually building up the various plies by hand to make each tire. Each tire is handcrafted. A lot of people really don't know that, okay? When they talk about how many plies there are on a... Now, Cincinnati, this is one that I have a real passion for. The Cincinnati Milling Machine Company. I used to sell copper, brass, and bronze to this company when I first got shape metal, okay? During World War I, World War II, this was as important as the atomic bomb, all right? was how many milling machines you had. You know, without these milling machines, you don't make guns, you don't make trucks, you just don't make the whole thing. You know, you're back to bow and arrow and spear. All right. Now, I like this, and this was about 1900, 1910. Okay, they would attach to a belt. You know, like here, you see these belts. It has a central steam engine that's driving these belts off of a shaft that goes throughout the plant, up in the ceiling. Okay, and here, all of a sudden now, they had a motor. There's a motor in the back around World War II. But for the most part, the machines are the same. Locomotives, yes. This picture, believe it or not, is down in Parsons Avenue. All right, right there in Parsons Avenue. This is in Lima, and Lima was known for building these massive locomotives. Look at and really this, you know, building locomotives. What is this? It's a boiler. Okay? That's what a steam engine is. A lot of people don't realize that how many things really run on steam. Okay? America just turned out a $13 billion aircraft carrier. Atomic. But guess what? The atomic power is doing the same thing as coal, producing steam. It's still just a steamboat. Okay? All right? But just look at this technology. All right? And this is what was driving the country itself. Next to that Lima plant where they built locomotives, when World War II started, given the nature of what heavy iron ore and the like being produced there in Lima, they decided to build a tank plant, which is still in operation today. Okay. This was the World War II vintage. This is what they're turning out today. This is what's going to Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. Okay? It's called the Abrams tank. All right? And the key thing, when they first started building tanks, they were riveted. They decided that that wasn't the best technology. So this is one of the reasons why they build tanks here. Notice how you don't see any rivets. What does that mean? This thing is cast and welded. Okay. First of all, it makes it a lot safer. But moving on. Let's not forget the aircraft industry. Oh, yes. The Wright brothers came up with powered flight. And in Evendale, that's a suburb just outside of Cincinnati, General Electric Aviation, GE. Yeah, they're producing jet engines, but they were producing turbocharged engines back during World War I. And the engines on the C-5, right here, this is what, carries, for instance, wherever the president goes, they put the president's car and limousine and everything on one of these. Okay, so it follows then behind Air Force One. All right? And let's see, when we fly, United, American Airlines, we're doing 350 miles an hour. Okay. Air Force One is doing something just below the sound barrier. Okay. Just below it, what is that, 600, I think 600 miles an hour, something like that. I mean, that's really, so they can get from one end, the president can get from one end, Washington to Los Angeles in no time at all. All right. Columbus Buggy Works. Before Detroit, ladies and gentlemen, it It was Columbus. This is where the transportation, the soft surreys and buggies were produced. And there was not just this company, there were others. And they were not just producing them for America. Just like Ford and General Motors, what they were producing was being put on a train and shipped up to either down the Mississippi and put on a ship, or shipped on a train and shipped to the East Coast and put on a ship and sent to Europe. Okay? A lot of people, see, Eddie Rickenbacker, Granville Woods also worked here. All right? Firestone. It was Clinton Firestone, of course. He was one of the co-founders. But Harvey Firestone was a salesman here at the Buggy Works. And he went into producing tires on a small scale. And then Henry Ford asked him if he could produce a particular type of tire. And that started that relationship, which, let me see, I think up until 10 years ago, all Ford cars were came off the line with Firestone tires. A Huffy bike. Okay, it started out as the Davis Sewing Machine Company, till George Huffman bought the Davidson Sewing Machine Company and diversified into bicycles, and eventually went to just bicycles. Now, given my age, I had to put this in here. People, that was the cat's meow. I mean, that was the coveted item. That was the Maserati of the 50s so far as a bicycle, okay, with a radio on it, okay, a radio. Huffy, what's that? Radio, the radio bike. So, and they're still in business today. Of course, they're now owned by an Asian firm that produces any number of bicycles. But they were very cooperative, the company, in letting me use their material. Somebody's forgotten, but he played a major role in the development of automobiles. Henry Ford had a hard time because there were a number of individuals that would not let Henry Ford produce cars. There was like an automobile association. And so Henry Ford wanted to make a name for himself through racing. And Henry Ford got permission from Alexander Winton to use his steering wheel. So when you go home, you are using a Winton steering wheel instead of just joystick and lever. You know what I mean? That's here's a Winton, and one of the things about Winton's vehicles, he did manufacture bicycles initially. Then he went to cars, but he never went into fully automated production. His vehicles were still custom made. He retired and just became, he was a wealthy man, but he was a consultant, okay, on all sorts of innovations. Body by Fisher. Here's another Columbus, Ohio. Over on the west side, there was the Fisher Body Plant. Okay, as a matter of fact, that's where the casino's still open over there. Okay, well, that's where the Fisher Body Plant was, where the casino is. Okay, and the Fisher brothers were from Norwalk, Ohio. Okay, it's interesting. General Motors would contract the building of their bodies, okay, to the Fisher brothers. And several other companies would go to the Fisher brothers to have their bodies built. Their symbol was a coach, right? And their slogan was "Body by Fisher." Okay, yes. Now, the Fisher brothers also in Cleveland had a plant during World War II, any number of plants. They built the motor housings here for the B-29. The B-29, this is what dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, okay? And they built about 2,000 of these things. Stop and think of that, people. We manufactured something like 2,000 of these things. And this was toward the latter part of the war. We started out with the B-17, a much smaller thing, but this was all compressurized. Here we are machining. This is a piston housing for a submarine diesel, okay? That's the kind of manufacturing and production, and when it's all said and done, this is what won the war. Okay? Yes, we had the Army and the like, but it was a civilian army that had the tools. For instance, and in many things, let's go back to those tanks. Our tanks were not known as being the best tanks, okay? The Germans' tank was far superior, okay? Far superior. And it would often take anywhere from 3 to 4 American tanks to destroy one German tank. But the problem is, for every one tank that the Germans could produce, we could produce 10. Yes, not good for them, okay. How about that? It used to be known as the Overland Jeep, but Willys, it was Willys Overland. They were a car manufacturer. And during World War II, they were one of the production manufacturers of the Jeep. Ford also turned out a Jeep. But this is the Willys plant. Look here, this is what I like. Now this, you hear this thing, Make America Great. This is what made America great, not just some slogan, okay? And you take note here, he's probably not union. He's got his own clothes. Note there are no steel toes, you know. What are we going to go with? Oh, ladies. Note these ladies. They're dressed in, what, their own clothes? What's that, kitchen aprons? All right? And they're manufacturing Jeeps. That's what made America great. Okay? Further assembly down here. Something few people know of, Frederick Douglass Patterson. Frederick Douglass Patterson was an African-American car manufacturer. He had a car company. It was in business till the 1930s, till the Great Depression. Okay, and it was in, of all places, Greenfield, Ohio. Oh, by the way, Greenfield, Ohio is very proud of it. You might not hear of him anywhere else, but if you go to Greenfield, Ohio, you will hear of the Patterson. He did produce school buses. And his buses, many of them were still in circulation through the 1950s. Okay? Greenfield bus. We're big on fire engines, people. In Cincinnati, as a matter of fact, it was the Ahern Fox. They were the first to mechanize a fire engine in Cincinnati. Seagraves, they were manufactured right here in Columbus, over on High Street, up until 1963. I think they're now up in Minnesota. But we still have now Sutphen, which is a definite, they're not small time by any means, okay? Absolutely. Their fire engines are being produced for NASA. You will see their fire engine equipment. Okay, excellent, excellent. They were very cooperative, as a matter of fact, in terms of pictures. You know, some folks I couldn't get, but they were very open. Really appreciate it. Yes, yes, they are. Yes, they are growing. Now, there he is. Now, those of you too young to remember, this was Ohio's governor. This was the man of the hour. And this is Honda himself, okay, Mr. Honda himself. The two came together. Honda wanted to, unlike what's happening with China, Honda said it is foolish to build cars that you're going to sell. Build the cars where you're going to sell them if you have a large market. He had a large market. He saw a large market here in the United States. That's where you should build them, okay? And he and Jim Rhodes worked that out. They started producing motorcycles there in Marysville. Then they went on to the Honda Accord. The first time I toured that, it shocked me because I had never seen Americans work in that manner in a factory. The Honda plant did not have a janitorial staff. Now, I toured, you know, Ford and General Motors plants, and, you know, if the line stopped, they'd light up a cigarette or whatever. Over here, if the line stopped, then all of a sudden they grab a broom, dustpan, rags, and they start cleaning. As soon as it starts, they go back to doing their work. Okay? And I think every 30 days they also switch in terms of the jobs that they're doing, so you're not just doing one job all your life. Okay? That made for a much more diverse workforce. Jeffrey, Gallion, and Marion. So we're talking about worldwide mining. Jeffrey, who used to be just right downtown here. It was a shame to see them go belly up. Gallion, this is a company that grew. You know, in 1900, America was still a dirt road country. Dwight D. Eisenhower, he had just graduated from West Point. His first assignment as a lieutenant was to go from, I think Connecticut, and take a group to California, and it took them something like 3 months. That's what the American roads were like in 1900 and 1905, okay? That's a young 22-year-old Dwight Eisenhower who, son of a gun, he became president of the United States. One of the things he did? Built an interstate system, and he financed it with a 2-cent a gallon gasoline tax. That's first rate. And people said he didn't do anything but just play golf. I'm sorry. Okay? And with that, you find an awful lot of galleon equipment and the like. Marion steam shovels. This is what built the Panama Canal. That's what's happening here. Battelle. Somewhat of a sad story. The Battelle, their mother and father and their son Gordon, within, I think, 5 years, let's see, 18, 25, 7 years, all three passed. First, the father passed. He left his steel fortune to his son and his wife. Then Gordon passed. In Gordon's will, he had established Battelle for researching, mining and the like. And then his mother passed, and in her will, reinforced his will. So all of a sudden, there's Battelle Memorial Institute that has the financing equivalent to, I think it was something like close to $60 million, okay, in the 1920s, okay? One of the things that they did, they worked with Chester Carlson, okay, to refine his photocopy process known as Xerox. I'm old enough to remember when that was a two-step process, as a matter of fact, but anyway. Right. And it's amazing the work that they're doing worldwide. And they operate any number of research laboratories all over the world, even for the federal government. Hobart Corporation and KitchenAid. Okay. Hobart really were several companies and divisions. The Hobart Welding Institute trained individuals especially ladies, to do the welding during World War II. Okay. And they're still around today in terms of their Hobart welders and the like. And they also do commercial kitchen equipment. And they have this thing known as the KitchenAid division, which they do dishwashers and just all sorts of things. Josephine Cochran invented the dishwasher in her company. Upon her death, they bought her company, okay? And she's from Ashtabula, Ohio. I think her company was out of Chicago, though, but she was from Ashtabula, Ohio. Okay. But they're still around, still very big. Okay, we're big on toys. Okay, we're big on toys, Play-Doh, Easy Bake Oven. Okay, all right. Etch-A-Sketch. Also, crayons. The American Crayon Company, they also do chalk. All right. How many of you had an Etch-A-Sketch at all? Okay, all right, very good. Okay. This is the guy, Jan Matzingler, who he came up with the lacing machine, which suddenly you could go from producing, a shoemaker can go from producing 50 pairs of shoes to 200 to 300 pairs of shoes a day. And with that, all of a sudden we get like the Godman shoes. You've heard of the Godman Guild here. That's where the money comes from. Also the Wolf shoes. The Wolf then later diversified into the Columbus Dispatch. Okay, yeah, that's the same Wolf. The Ohio Match. Okay, now especially in the days of cooking with gas. Okay, you had to start with a match. All right, didn't have the electronic ignition there, and this safety blue tip match, of all things. Yes, yes, yes. Love that. And they were in Wadsworth, Ohio. Great place where I had my first deep dish pizza, but that's another story. Yeah. Okay. Another Columbus local is the Ebinger Sanitary Manufacturing. That Oasis turned into Oasis water fountains, which, you can find this in schools all over the country. All right. I remember when I lived in Louisiana, the kids would tease me about being from Ohio, and I said, we built everything in this school, and I just walk over and I just show them any number of things. And something, you're going to go home today driving on Ohio tires, so get out of my face. Anyway. Okay. Kroger. What did Kroger do? Used to be you would go into the store with a list, you would give it to the grocer, and he would pick out your groceries. Okay, he would take them off the shelf and the like. Kroger said, put it there, stack it up. Let people do their own shopping. Let them pick their own produce. He bought a bunch of cabbage once, and he didn't really know what to do with it. He just got a sale on a lot of cabbage. And his mother canned a bunch of sauerkraut. And he said, son of a gun, let's come up with our own name brand. Okay? And baked goods. All of a sudden, they started baking their own bread. Not to mention delivery, which is still this, especially during the pandemic, big item. Okay? That wasn't new. It was original. Okay. Ferdinand Schumacher and Quaker Oats. All right? Here's an American favorite. Out of Akron. Interesting thing here, Ferdinand, he believed definitely he had faith in the Almighty, and he didn't think that he needed insurance. Well, he was number one in producing oatmeal, but his factory burned down. Yeah. And but there was an association which they made him the president of. And he did such a good job of managing the association of oatmeal manufacturers that suddenly he was able to organize them all together into one company, which became the Quaker Oat Company. Smuckers, okay? They were very helpful. I had a hard time getting through them, to use these pictures. And finally, I found the name of Mark Smuckers. He's the new CEO, young guy. And I just, sent him an email. Oh my goodness, I sent him an email 15 minutes later. Somebody was assigned to me to work with me and edit and everything. 15 minutes, okay? Well, know the right people there, okay? That's Jerome right there, as a matter of fact. He was still up until the time of his death there. And they started out with apple butter, using apples from some of the original trees that Johnny Appleseed had planted, John Chapman. Okay, of course, an Ohio staple there, Procter & Gamble products. Just gigantic, just diversified. They're their own competition. Okay, make a long story short. Ivory, the soap that floats, they own Noxema, you name it, they're into it, all right? William and James. They married sisters, and their father-in-law suggested that they go into business together. One manufactured candles, the other did soap. So that's how they came about here in Cincinnati. Wrapping up here, the Hoover Company. Spangler's original, and Hoover was his brother-in-law. Yes, that was it. Well, Spangler passed away, so Hoover naturally took over the company, and he really expanded it. But they were just a staple there in Canton. And the whole idea of going into the home, demonstrating it, especially in post-World War I America, this became the thing in terms of how to clean and the like. The White Sewing Machine Company and the White Motor Company. Okay, the sewing machine, that was the father. The motor company, that was the son. They were big in World War II also in terms of manufacturing motor vehicles. But right here, this is President Taft of Ohio. And one of the things, he converted the stables into a garage. And it was a white 1911 steamer that he purchased. I'm trying to think, this, by today's standard, this cost $115,000 with that convertible cost. okay? And he liked it, I guess, something about the steamer. When the press would come around, being a real pain to him, they could eject steam toward the press or the paparazzi, whatever, you know, so say, get away. He liked that, so. Frigidaire, not only, this was in Dayton, part of Delcolite, but not only did they produce refrigerators, and Kettering was a part of this, but during World War II, they manufactured machine guns. And when they took on the manufacturing machine guns, they brought the price down 75%. Okay? And that was another way that we were able to win the war in terms of production. Okay. Sherwin-Williams, there they were. Henry and William, a couple of Civil War vets. Their big thing was their ready mixed paint. Prior to that, a painter, you know, had to put a little linseed oil in back and forth to get the pigment. And they'd like to come in and do it one time because, you know, if you wanted them to, you know, touch up, well, boy, that was very difficult to try to get it to match. So Sherwin-Williams, this thing of ready mixed paint, and with ready mixed paint, all of a sudden, hello, you could be your own painter. And who were some of their first clients? Women. A lot of painters didn't like that. Just want to wrap up here. One of the things, there's so much that Ohio has produced. I have barely hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of what Ohio manufactures. Now, I'd say you've heard about Intel coming into town, of which this multi-billion-dollar facility. And please note, that's just the first phase that they're talking about, okay? That is going to change Central Ohio. Newark still hasn't comprehended as to what they're in for, all right? And what that's going to do for education, the level of schools. One of the things that brought them to Central Ohio was Ohio State University's curriculum in computer science and whatever the microchip technology is. I was glad to hear that, you know, and that's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So, so far as microchips, will be a little bit of a Silicon Valley. Okay, let's see. And here are some of my other titles that you're welcome to when we're done back there in the back. We have a few minutes. Any questions?
We had one online. Someone asked, was the Godman Shoe Company located in Wineland Park?
My research, it didn't give the address, it just showed that it was downtown, not a specific address. Okay. That's a good question, though. Anybody else?
One more online. They asked, did you come across any particularly interesting facts or anything that like became a favorite story for an invention that you discovered in your research?
Facts about?
Like something that was created for to solve like a difficult problem, or something that might have been like created by mistake accidentally and then it took off?
Yeah, you know, the vulcanizing, which was done by, what was that? That was Goodrich, right? Yeah. I'm going to say that the things that I discovered, oh my goodness, there were so many that came about. You know, especially over in Dayton. I know the oh my goodness, what is it? The Velcro, I believe it was. I'm trying to think. I know there was a story behind that. I know that so far as glass, over in Zanesville, and what they were doing in ceramics, there were a number of things that, by accident and for the sake of safety and improving things, things tend to, go a different way. Caught me off guard there.
Well, Conrad, thank you so much. This talk was very, very fascinating. And like you said, so many wonderful inventions coming out of Ohio. So thank you for sharing all of them.
Well, thank you. Sure.